For people who don't know me, some of it is going to be probably repeat, but I'm from this area. I graduated from Paraguay High School in 2004. I'm getting kind of old. And maybe not, I shouldn't say that. It's not meant to be offensive, but I just feel kind of old sometimes. But I go to Graham Church, and I do want to extend a thank you for praying for us. I don't know if you guys have heard our pastor unexpectedly passed away a few weeks ago, and so if you could continue praying for us, we would really appreciate it, just for direction for the future. We've got some really great leaders and elders in our church that are faithful men, so we know that God is not taken by surprise and he'll care for us. But so we just wanted to say thank you for being with us in prayer for that. And my parents are Ed and Kathy Sawyer, for those of you who maybe would be familiar with them. And if you got kids in the Perry schools, my brother-in-law is Ty Rockefeller, who teaches music. So we're from here. So I got home. I haven't been here for about 3 years now. I headed back to Paraguay in February of 2020. So you can imagine how much ministry I was able to get done right off the bat, because our world closed a little bit even longer in Paraguay than it did here in the States. But I've been there now for 9 years, which is kind of crazy to think. And you guys have been along for the whole ride. So that's really encouraging. That was really encouraging, Pastor, to hear that you guys are praying for me and are with me. I'm not going alone. The Lord is with me, but it's really encouraging to know that faithful people are behind. And I couldn't continue doing what I'm doing without people like you and churches like you. So I just want to say thanks for being along for the ride. So if I'm just going to repeat some things, just so that some people maybe are familiar a little bit with my story and my background. I actually am from this church. Like, I grew up, I was dedicated in this church, so it's always beautiful to be back. I was just saying to someone, I just super love the sanctuary. I think it's so beautiful. So it brings good memories, and I remember learning about God downstairs in the Sunday school rooms. So God has a faithful presence here in Prairie Congregational, and I don't know, it's just kind of cool to think that he has extended Prairie Congregational into Paraguay. The ministry that he was doing here is going into Paraguay. So I'm thankful that you guys have been faithful and that God has been faithful with you for so many years. But I came to know Christ when I was about 5, from things that I heard, and from my parents. They are believers as well. And so I've been a Christian for most of my life, almost all of it. But then when I was in middle school, peer pressure is tough, man. I don't know if you guys remember that, but it's kind of hard, especially in the middle school years. And so I just really wasn't living for Christ very much, if at all. Like, I went to church and I was a really good church kid, and people would be like, oh, Katie Sawyer, she loves Jesus because she shows up and she does all these things. But then I'd go to school and I'd be like, do you know Jesus? Do you go to church? Whatever. But then I would do really bad things. And then we went to this camp with my church, and the pastor just said, are you living for Christ? Because if you're not, you need to stop saying you're a Christian. That's an embarrassment to the name of Christ. So either say you're a Christian and walk with God, or don't say you're a Christian at all and keep on doing what you're doing. And as a 13-year-old, that was really impactful for me to hear, because what we do matters. What we do is salt and light, or it is not. And so I was at Camp Miracle, for anybody that knows Camp Miracle, but I was sitting there and I just remember thinking, like, I had already been thinking, like, what I was going to do when I grew up. I was going to take after my mom and be a nurse, or I really like arguing, so I wanted to be a lawyer. Just different things. But even when I was 13, I remember saying, like, God, whatever you want me to do with my life, that's what I want to do, when I was 13. And sure enough, like, the year later, that moment changed my life. From then on, not that it was easy to say no to peer pressure and things like that and to follow Christ. It's still hard. But I just had made the choice. I'm going to live my life for Christ as much as I can. And our church has a lot of missionaries that come through, and we had a missionary come through that was telling us about people groups in the world that have no opportunity to hear about the good news of Jesus Christ because of their language and because of their culture. They don't speak any other language in the world that the Bible's written in. And the missionary had said it's kind of a tough work, and there's not very many people banging down the door to do this work that God has us do. And I remember thinking, like, well, I like to do hard things. Like, maybe God is calling me to do that. Like, if you need people, I'm a willing person. And I think kind of in that moment, the Lord confirmed that call to be a missionary in my heart. So I was about 14, 15 years old. And it was like those verses in Isaiah 6:8. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send and who will go for us?" And then I said, "Here am I, send me." And then following that up, our church did a missions trip as when I was a teenager to Panama. And I remember the bathroom was over the ocean. It was a outhouse over the ocean. Yep. Yep. And the people would follow us everywhere we went. Our house was made out of bamboo sticks, and so they just like look in. There was like no privacy, and I was just like, ugh, you know. And I remember I walked to the outhouse. You had to go on this little bridge, and so I walked to the outhouse, and I sat down, and this huge wave came up, and I was like, I know what's in that water. And I thought, and as I had walked, all these people were following us, you know, everywhere we went, they followed us. And so that wave hit me, and I said, God, I heard you wrong. This is not what you called me to do. I am not strong. Nope. I am weak, and I don't want this. So I heard you wrong in your call to me. And then as I walked out of the outhouse and I saw those people lined up because they were with us everywhere we went, he reminded me of those verses in Samuel. Man looks at the outward appearance, and the Lord looks at the heart. And we were there to do a conference, help take care of children for a conference for their church. So missionaries had already gone, they were called the Kuna people. Missionaries had already invested their lives, so much so that they had planted a church in one community, and that those pastors, those believers went out and made other disciples. And so there was all of these churches from the Kuna people, and they're all coming together to have a pastor's conference. And so I was experiencing firsthand like what missions looks like, and the point and the goal of going and spreading the good news of Jesus Christ, to make disciples that go and make disciples that go and make disciples. And so it was really sweet that God kindly rebuked me in my heart to say, you are looking at these things that splash on you and these people that follow you around. But if someone wasn't concerned about their heart like I am, they would be lost and dying and going to hell. And so that kind of confirmed that calling that the Lord had in my life. Matthew 28:19-20, maybe you're familiar with it, maybe you're not. So I'm just going to say it anyways. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. And so this is a message for all of us here in Perry, Michigan, or in Paraguay, South America. God calls us all to be a part of making disciples and teaching about him and teaching people to observe the things that he's commanded us. I just, like Pastor said, I just happened, or maybe you were the one that said, I just happened to be somewhere else doing those kinds of things. But yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our organization to kind of refresh people of what we do. We've gone through a name change, and maybe that was true last time, but we're called Ethnos 360, formerly called New Tribes Mission. So our goal back in the day was to go to tribal groups that are cut off from the gospel of Jesus Christ, that have their own, like I said before, have their own language and their own culture. And so they're like, in Paraguay, we have 19 different people groups, and I think there's about 13 different languages represented in those people groups. And so Paraguay, there is a Spanish Bible, but many of the people there don't understand Spanish. And so how are they going to hear the good news of Jesus Christ unless somebody goes and tells them, right? So our organization saw the need to go And we've gone through many different phases or methodologies on how we kind of do that. But now we've kind of dwindled it down. We focus on 3 things, and that's Bible translation, if it's necessary, into the language of the people. We do literacy, because if you're going to have a Bible, you have to be able to read your Bible in order to be able to know God and to be able to continue to grow. And because we're talking about indigenous groups, many of them are just really remote. And even in Paraguay, maybe almost all the villages, Paraguay has provided a school for them, but because of the way the politics of the country work out, the people groups themselves can choose their own teachers. And so they often will choose like a popular person, or like the sorry, just the Spanish words coming to my head. 1 second. I'm so sorry. The chief's son, for example. They will pick maybe the chief's son who doesn't know how to read or doesn't know how to do math, but because he's popular, he's the one that gets chosen, and because of politics, the government can't intervene in that kind of stuff. So we would love to be a part of and try to be a part of that. Even for a normal person, it is helpful to be able to read, right? Even if we're not talking about the gospel at all, but so that they can continue to develop and grow as people. So we work on literacy. And then the third thing that we focus a lot of our energy on is called foundational Bible teaching, or it's chronological Bible teaching. And so a lot of the places that we're working in already have a concept of God, because all indigenous groups have a religious system set up. So they may have a god or may have many gods. Maybe they don't call them God. It might be like the big chief or things like that, they might say. But if we were to go in there and just say, like, God sent his son Jesus to die on the cross for you, they're going to be thinking, the God that I know I have to dance for every time it stops raining because I need him to provide sweet potatoes for me. Or the God that I know, if I do these certain things, I can hide my sin from him. And so they already have a concept of God and who he is, and that most of the time, this God can be manipulated. Well, if we know scripture, we know that our God cannot be manipulated. And so we start in the very beginning, God and who he is. So we are starting on a clean slate of scripture, and because when we don't know things, if we hear things, we're just going to kind of plug them into our brains in ways that are understandable to us. And because scripture is so different from what they think, it needs to be explained well and slowly. And so we take the time to teach chronologically through the Bible. And so we don't even get to Jesus Christ and what he did until there's about 72 lessons. I think he comes in at lesson 50 something. So there's a lot of background that we're teaching that's all pointing to this Redeemer that's going to come. Because if you look at the Old Testament, all of these stories are pointing to this Redeemer that God has sent. And so it just helps with clearing up some understanding. But all of this is done after we've taken the time to learn the language and the culture of the people. Because they don't speak another language. The only way for them to understand is for us to speak their language. And so everywhere we work around the world, because we're in many different countries around the world, that's how we do things. So if you'll remember back to when I first moved to Paraguay, the very first thing I did was learn Spanish and Paraguayan culture, to learn about this new context, this new country that I found myself in, to be able to share the good news of Jesus Christ to somebody, because there's not very many people that even speak English in Paraguay, right? So Romans 10:13-15 says, "For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. How will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? And how are they to preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news." So we gotta go. That's the responsibility that God has given us, whether, again, that's here in Perry, Michigan, or in Paraguay. People need to hear it, so we have to say it. And sometimes we need to be creative in the ways that we're communicating it. For me, it looks like learning another language. That might not, well, if you're talking to teenagers in America, sometimes that is learning another language. Sometimes I work with a youth group when I'm home, and they always have new lingo or words and things that I don't know what they're saying, and so they all kind of laugh at me like, "Oh, Katie, you're so old." And I know, I'm so sorry. Just teach me what it means. Anyways, and so that's kind of the background. That's how the Lord led me and what He's doing and the organization that I'm working with. And then He led me to Paraguay. That's like a long story too, but I tried to go to Russia and it didn't work out. I wanted to go to Bolivia, that also didn't work out. And it was very clear to me that the Lord opened the doors for me to go to Paraguay. And so that has kept me a lot too. If you remember any of my story, things have not gone like real great all the time. But God has been faithful, and there's been Ebenezer's or Joshua Stones, things that God has said, these are clear, this is where I called you, this is what I'm doing, and trust in me and who I am, because He's the one that's going to be with us as we're doing the things that He's called us to do. So just a little bit about Paraguay. Again, I've already said it, but just say for the new people, it's the landmass size of California, so it's a smaller country. And we've got 2 national languages, which there's not too many of countries in the world, I think, that have that, but we speak Spanish. 92% of the population speaks Spanish. 98% of the population speaks a language called Guarani. It's a tribal language, and so Paraguayan national people are very connected to their tribal roots, which is really interesting. Even some of the things that the common, even Christian, will say or believe, it feels a little bit like animistic or indigenous in this thinking, and but they're just very connected to that background, and so they're a unique culture. The population is about 7 million, and in that there's 122,000 tribal people, represented by 19 different tribal groups. And so our organization works specifically with tribal people, and our goal is to plant churches or to come alongside churches that have already been planted and help them grow so that they are strong disciples of Jesus Christ, that are making strong disciples of Jesus Christ, kind of going back to that thing that we were talking about earlier. So our goal now, we used to be planting churches where there are no churches that exist, and now in 2022, there are not that many groups left in the world that haven't been touched with the gospel or haven't heard about Jesus Christ. And so that is true in Paraguay. A lot of mission work has happened, but one thing that is concerning is there's not very many disciples to show for the mission work that has happened. A lot of the work has been done even in Spanish, or there's just a lot of misunderstandings. So in Paraguay, our goal is to come alongside some of these tribal churches, tribal pastors, and help teach them and disciple them. Because what ends up happening is I was working with the Enschlat people the last time I came here, and maybe you've heard this story before, but one time I went to go visit my friend in the village, and she said, "Did you hear about so-and-so? He was on his deathbed last night." And I said, "No, what, tell me about it, what happened?" And so she said he was crying out, asking for help, and then the bad shaman came to take his life. And he's a spirit. I didn't see him, but he passes through walls, wears a black cape, and has a white face. He sounds very scary. But when he shows up, they almost always die, or they're on the verge of dying. So he started crying out for help because he knew that he was going to die. And so she said, so the good shaman came. And I said, oh, like, who are the good shaman? Who are our shaman in this village? And they're the pastors of the church. Well, the pastors of the church, she said. And that's a little bit concerning to think that the pastors of the church are also still dabbling in the spiritual realm of their tribal beliefs. And so what that showed to me and kind of shows to our organization that, yes, people will raise their hand and say, I know Jesus, I'm saved. They have not clearly understood that Jesus is very different. there's one way, and this way cannot be combined with any other way. And so then maybe that helps explain why we're still in Paraguay. Even though there's been missionaries there for many, many years, there's just a lot of misunderstandings that have taken place. And so we are desiring to be in it for the long haul and help teach differently than has been taught before, and in languages that they can understand, not in a tribal language that they only understand partially. A lot of the Spanish that they speak is like to go to the grocery store and buy things, or to work for somebody. It's not things of the heart. Because if you think about things of the heart, that takes a lot of language to be able to express how God is working and to be able to understand. And so if you don't understand another language to that point, it's probably going to be really difficult for you to understand that you were a sinner and that you needed Jesus to save you in a clear way. So, as I said, the last time I was here, I was working with the unset people, and I also said that it was kind of rough. And so God actually, I just wasn't healthy enough. At the end of the day, I wasn't healthy enough to continue on in that work. I didn't have any coworkers as I was working in the tribal area, and it's a lot of weight to do that. So I was learning language and trying to get to know the culture, but nobody else besides the people themselves spoke that language. So even something like, I'm hearing people say these things. Is this true? Like, am I hearing right? There wasn't even anybody to run those things by, or there's just a lot of spiritual things that come up and demands, and to do that all myself was really hard. And so the Lord moved me on from there for the time being, and I'm now in the capital city of Asuncion. That's where I started, where I was learning Spanish and Paraguayan culture. And so I went down there with the goal to plant churches or come alongside churches and help people understanding the good news of Jesus Christ. And not that that's not true anymore, but I'm now focused on the church, the Paraguay National Church. Because God is working in Paraguay, and he was working in Paraguay before our organization showed up. But the ways that some of the people are going about it, we would like to partner with them and see how we can help one another. Because like I said, a lot of the teaching and things that have been done up until now are not very clearly understood. And so part of my job is meeting with other organizations and seeing what they do and seeing how we differ and maybe how we can work together. We haven't had anybody doing the job that I'm doing for 9 years. So it was a little bit starting from scratch. I should say it's called mobilization. So the idea behind it also is to mobilize the Paraguayans themselves to go and be missionaries. They're very okay with white Americans coming down to Paraguay and going and telling the good news of Jesus Christ, but are not very excited to go themselves. So the main core of my job is to encourage people to go and be a part of this. And part of that is helping them understand that no, not everybody speaks Spanish. Not everybody even speaks Guarani. That's a tribal language, but when I was working with the Inshet, a lot of my friends would say, oh, so you're learning Guarani? No, I'm learning Inshet. What is that? It's Inshet. That's the language that they speak. Oh, I thought all of our tribal people spoke in Guarani. Oh, they don't. There's many languages represented in this country. So it is a lot of helping people grow in their understanding too. It's kind of funny. It would be like us thinking like that Chippewa and Cherokee were the same language, right? Like I think almost all of us know those are very different languages. But just learning what people know and what they understand and trying to come alongside them and expand their understanding of these things and sharing God's heart for these people that need people to go and invest their lives and tell them about Jesus Christ. So it looks like I said, meeting with other organizations, it looks like youth groups having their meetings and then they invite me to come. And so sharing with youth about God's call for us to go and make disciples, and specifically with the indigenous groups that we have represented in Paraguay. Sometimes it looks like there's like a 24-hour prayer marathon that another organization hosts in the country. It's a really big thing. They put it on TV. So they set a block of time aside for tribal people, praying for the tribal works. So I would be the one that would go and represent at those and be praying for the tribal people, and the work that God is doing there. It would be going to a missions camp where they collect a youth from all over the country, and so they're getting excited and expanding their understanding of God's heart. But maybe they want to be involved in missions, but they don't know what that means or how they can be a part. So then I set up a little booth. Many organizations set up a little booth, and just I'm there to try to collect people to go and serve with our organization. That's one aspect of the things I've been a part of. Another thing I've been a part of is being able to make visits and encourage our missionaries that are working in these remote places. I didn't feel necessarily very encouraged when I was doing that work. And so I'm thankful that God has given me opportunities to go to my coworkers and to see them, to hang out with their kids. Missionary kids are like so needy for people to love them and hang out with them and be known. We all want to be known. And so when they're living in some of these remote places where they don't speak any languages, I'm thankful to be able to go and do that. It does help with, on a side note, like my job. So a part of what I do is I'm in charge of our social medias, because that's, if you want to like get a bunch of information out really quick to specifically youth, you need to be on social media. And so we have like an Instagram account and a Facebook account where I can post different prayer requests for the different works that we have, the pastors or the churches or the teaching that we're doing, so that people can have the information at their fingertips. If they want to be a part of what God is doing, but they can't be the ones to go, we kind of view our social media as ways that people can be involved in this process, because we're not all called to go, but we all have a responsibility to be a part. And so that's kind of what we do with social media. So me making these trips also makes me be able to see firsthand things that we can be praying for, needs that they have. There was one church that needed a guitar, and so I posted it on our social media, and there was somebody from Asuncion that he put new strings on his guitar, and he sent it out 6 hours away so that this church could have a guitar to do worship. So just things like that. And it's beautiful to see how God is involving different churches to encourage these churches that otherwise wouldn't have been able to be encouraged. It's helpful for my heart too, because even though God has pulled me away from being able to be firsthand and involved in teaching and discipling, it's really hard for me to not be able to do that. And it still kind of grieves my heart a little bit, but that's okay. These trips are a way that I can still make friends and build relationships with these, specifically women, the women of my friends' friends, I should say, my missionary coworkers' friends, and so that I can encourage them in the ways that I can, and so that fills my heart with joy too, to be able to rub shoulders with them and to be able to pray for them, and to see what He's doing. I'm still holding out hope that He will heal. He has been healing lots of things in my heart and in my life, and so I'm still holding out hope that I'm not too old to move back into a tribal location. It might not be the one where I was at, because I would still be working by myself, but it's all encouraging towards that. And one thing that I got to do is cover, so we are about 9 people that live in the capital city doing different jobs. And one of the jobs that we have is we have a print shop. So any of the teaching that we do, we print it in Asuncion in the capital city. These sometimes they're big old books, and then send them out to the different tribal locations. My coworker that was in charge of that went home on her furlough in 2020. And so because I couldn't really start my ministry because it was with people and meeting in organizations or churches, which all of that was shut down for many months, I filled in for her role. And one of the things that I loved to be able to do was the missionaries that were translating the Bible also send it to our print shop, and then we print out the rough draft copies. And so it was thrilling to my heart to be able to do this ministry, because it's just copying books organizing them, and then you put like this kind of a spiral. You just like hand put the spiral. So you have to physically be there, but there's not like much else you can do. But it was really sweet to be able to pray for these people, to pray for God's word to continue to go forth. And so just practically, there's many jobs that missionaries do, and I don't even think I knew them all, and I'm still learning them more. But he's given me the opportunity to be involved in many different things. One other thing I did right before I came home, I stopped in Bolivia for about a month before I came back to the U.S., because we have a missionary training center in Bolivia. And so all of the teachers that are there are also missionaries, but they're going through their classes of how to learn other languages, because we're learning languages that aren't written down. So you have to learn them with people. And so you just look at the things that are around you, and that's what you learn. And then it continues on after that. But so these guys were learning how to do it, the first thing. And so the teacher that was in charge of it asked if I would come and do American culture in English with these students. And so that was kind of, it was really fun for me to be able to kind of be in a little bit of a teacher role, but also to just be American. It was a little bit weird, I will say, because I went so many years like, don't be American, like you're American, but don't be offensive in this way or whatever.